I have white and I'm going to play d4. My opponent plays d5. All right, I'm playing the Queen's Gambit. It's still the most serious opening, the one most played by strong players. He plays the pawn to e6. I play knight to c3 to reinforce the attack on the pawn at d5, but also so that the knight supports the push to e4. And that's exactly what I'm going to do. I support the push to e4 immediately. He takes, I recapture. Maybe he'll play bishop b4 check. There you go. And here there are two ways to play this position. I remember during the first World Championship between Carlsen and Anand, I think it was that first World Championship, Carlsen brought his knight back to c3, not fearing bishop takes, pawn takes, because that strengthens. The center and black will be deprived of their best bishop, their bishop on the dark square, because the bishop on the light square is blocked. But there's another way to play, which is to play bishop d2. I'm aware that I'm giving up the pawn on d4. I take the bishop. He'll take the knight with check. I'll play bishop e2. He might even take the pawn on g2. I'll play bishop f3. He'll go back and I'll have given up 2 pawns. But I'll have better development and I'll have the dark square bishop. So I'm going to play bishop to d2. This will create a lot of imbalances. Dynamic imbalances related to my development advantage and static imbalances. Since he does have 2 extra pawns, that's better for the endgames, but I have the bishop on the dark square. However, in this pawn structure, he has weaknesses on the dark squares. You see, because he put his pawns on white square. So I play the bishop to e2. Now, he's going to take the g2 pawn. That's normal. No, he plays knight to a6. He's attacking my bishop. So that's interesting. And if I retreat the bishop to i3, he's going to play against me. c5, so I'll have to put the bishop on d6. But there are a lot of players who play this to prevent me from being able to play queen d6 and have my queen in front of the bishop, which would allow me to infiltrate. So now I'm going to have to play bishop d6. If I had gone back to c3, probably f6, then e5, and that would have completely blocked the diagonal for me. So here, the bishop on d6 is well placed. You can see that it's not easy to dislodge. So my opponent has 1 extra pawn and can win a second one, but he'll have to deal with this bishop on d6. You see, even if he plays knight to a7, which he does, he won't be able to castle, otherwise he'll lose the knight. So he didn't want to go for the capture of the pawn on g2. Let me explain. If he had taken on g2, I would have played bishop to f3. Often players retreat to g6. And then knight to e2. We can have rooks on g1 because the knight protects the rook. But the knight on e2 can also come to f4, destabilizing the queen. In the end, I'm down to pawns, but I have plenty of pieces that are active. And he didn't want to give me all that development. So here, he simply plays knight to a7, and I'm going to play knight to f3. I would be down 1 pawn, but I would have this bishop on a dark square. Usually, players always take my pawn. g2. So here, I'm a bit surprised, and it's true that I'm a little out of my depth. But in any case, I'm going to play knight to f3. 1 more pawn for black. But there's this issue with the bishop on the dark square, and you see he can't to castle, otherwise he loses the knight on a7. So he plays knight to f5 to attack my bishop. That's interesting. And so if I retreat to a3, he's going to play c5 to block it. And you see he'll want to play moves like b6, f6, e5, and ultimately completely block me on the dark squares. So then I wonder, should I keep the bishop on the dark squares? If I kingside castling, he'll take queen takes. I'd be down a pawn. I wouldn't have the bishop on the dark squares anymore, but he wouldn't be able to castle with my queen present. But he'll take my bishop on the light squares. If I do kingside castling, knight takes, queen takes, he takes my bishop on the light squares. I still need to look at the continuation because I can put a rook on d1 and threaten. Queen d8 mate. And how can he prevent that? He can't to castle. If the bishop moves, it can only go to d7, and I'll take on d7 with check. Then he can play f6 to create that escape square. But I'll have queen d8, he comes to f7, and I'll take his rook. So I'm going to go for this line. I am doing kingside castling. So he's going to be able to eliminate my bishop on the black square. But honestly, I think that in any case, he had already taken measures against my bishop on the black square. With this move, 9 knight to 7 knight f5. As I told you, if I retreat, I'll get hit with c5 anyway, and that will block me. And the queens to 4 checks, there's bishop d7 against me. So he takes, I recapture, and if he takes the bishop, I play rook d1. And so he plays the bishop to d7. That's well played because he's also preparing queenside castling. So what am I looking at here? I could consider knight e5. He does queenside castling, knight takes. I would attack both rooks, the fork. But I still lose the bishop here. Otherwise, what do I have? Well, I have the placement of a rook on d1 immediately, although I don't know which one. Let's imagine I put this rook from f1 on d1. He's going to queenside castling. And now let's imagine I play knight to f5. I'm going to attack his bishop. If his bishop moves, he only has the d8 square, and I could take his rook on d8 and deliver mate. So he'll take my bishop here, I'll take his here, and when I take his bishop here, what am I threatening? I'm threatening nothing, and my knight is pinned. I'm not threatening to go to b8 and deliver mate because his knight is defending. So that bothers me a bit. Otherwise, I play knight e5, queenside castling, and bishop f3. He takes the pawn on c4. But I take the pawn on f7 and attack these two rooks. All right, let's play like that. Knight to e5. The knight moves up to the outpost. I'm threatening queen takes bishop, so he's going to do queenside castling. That's pretty much certain. He can't take my bishop anyway because I would have taken his with check and I would have done queen takes f7 mate. So there you go. He just did queenside castling. And I'm going to play bishop f3. He won't even be able to take the pawn on c4. The knight is protecting it. So that seems good to me. This move, bishop f3. He'll be able to play to f5 to defend the pawn f7 that my knight wanted to take. But my bishop on f3 can sometimes help me with sacrifices on c6. I know that for now it's well protected, but I'll have to keep an eye on it. The advantage for me is that the knight isn't active at the moment, but I'm still down a pawn. I have some initiative. You can see that my pieces are attacking, but this rook-queen face-off still makes me anxious. He comes to f4, and so I'm going to put a rook on d1. I don't know which one. That's always the problem. Is it the rook A or the rook F that should go to d1? I'll put the rook A, but I'm not sure about it. So what's the idea here? It's that the bishop can't move. Its only square is the 8, but that would allow for queen takes rook mate, since that would cut off the defense from the other rook. And I can have moves like rook d4, which attacks his queen, then the other rook to d1, tripling the heavy pieces on the file. We also have to look at what small moves like g3 give. Why not? But here, anyway, am I threatening knight? Not right away, because he can exchange the queens first. So first I'll have to push back his queen before playing knight takes bishop. For example, if I play g3 and he comes to f6, knight takes bishop. But then his queen can take mine. So I'll have to push back his queen with rook d4. Rook d4, queen f6, and knight takes bishop. And if his knight moves and I have mine on d7, I could play queen b8, mate. But already once I take his bishop, sacrifices on c6 will become possible. He plays rook f8. He comes to defend f7. And so here you see if I play knight takes bishop, he trades the queens, I recapture, but then he plays rook takes knight. So we'll play rook d4 first to push back his queen. His queen must not be able to trade with mine when my knight leaves. And besides, rook d4 frees up the d1 square for, finally, the only piece of mine that's not yet in play, the rook f1. So he comes to f5. I'm considering it because my idea is to play knight takes bishop, but there are also attacking moves against his queen, like bishop g4, for example. But that doesn't really bring much. So let's take his bishop. Otherwise, do I have another interesting move? I could add a rook here, but I'll go ahead. Knight takes bishop. He might try to play maybe a 5 so that his queen attacks the knight afterwards. Why not? And he resigns. So as you can see, the computer gives me 87% pressure versus 74% for my opponent. But look closely, I made a blunder. Let's go see where it happened. So let's look at this game. I have white and I start with the pawn to d4. So he plays d5, c4, the queen's gambit. He also plays c3. And here, the main move. Normally, in theory, it's knight to f6. Why? Precisely to double the control of the square on a4 so that I can't make this push. But my opponent plays c6, so I go ahead with the push to e4. Now, it's not bad for black. They can accept to do this, but you have to be careful. Then I recapture with the knight, and here my opponent plays bishop to b4 check. But sometimes in very fast games online, I have opponents who don't play the bishop to b4 with check and instead play knight to f6. In those cases, I take, and if my opponent plays quickly without paying attention, it can cost them dearly. For example, I've managed to win games after knight to f3, bishop to d6, bishop to d3, kingside castling. The opponent develops very quickly, but then gets hit by the bishop. g5, they lose the queen. The knight protects the bishop attacks, and the other bishop traps. Of course, black should have given a check on b4 with their bishop, or at least played h6 to prevent the bishop from coming in. But in my game, as you saw, the opponent played bishop b4 check. So it's entirely possible to bring the knight back to c3, but I play bishop to d2, fully aware that I'm giving up the d4 pawn. But I do it to capture the bishop on the black square. He takes the knight with check, I play bishop e2, and here it's interesting because he's going to play a theoretical move. He'll play the move knight to a6. If he had come to take the pawn g2, I would have played bishop. f3, often black retreat to g5 or g6. Then with white, we play knight to e2, and you can see the analysis bar for white. They're better, even though they're down 2 pawns. But the bishop on the black square is very well positioned. There will be moves like rook to g1 or knight to f4, which will come to destabilize the queen. And of course, the bishop, since it's behind the diagonal, leaves the d6 square free so that the queen can come there and join with the bishop, with possibilities to penetrate along the dark diagonal. But as you saw in the game, he played knight to a6 to attack my bishop on the dark square. And that's well played because if I retreat to a3, he plays c5 and my bishop on the dark square can't play anymore. So I'm going to put it on d6, but by coming to d6, it prevents my queen from exploiting that square. Now here, he could have still taken the pawn on g2, still in this idea of a variation, but he chooses to play knight to e7. And for that move, the computer actually puts a question mark. In reality, that move bothered me because at first, I thought he couldn't kingside castling because he would lose the knight. But the idea for black is to play knight f5 and get rid of the bishop. Well, I can keep it, but it won't be of any use to me anymore. If I retreat to a3, there will be c5. If I go to e5, there will be f6, then e5. And my bishop on a dark square will end up completely blocked by this pawn structure on dark squares. And so that's why I play knight to f3, and when he plays knight to f5, I let my bishop on the dark square get captured. Here, I decide to kingside castling. He takes my bishop on the dark square, the queen recaptures, and he is up a pawn. But he has development problems, of course. And now he plays bishop to d7. That's a mistake, a blunder for him. Yet it's a completely understandable move. Since he can't do kingside castling, he's preparing queenside castling. And it seems like the totally logical move in the position, but it's a blunder that I won't take advantage of. And that's why the computer tells me that I also made a blunder. Because in this position, I played e5. But in reality, the best move here was to play bishop e3. Because the queen lacks squares. Actually, it still has one left, the g4 square. But after queen to g4, king to e5, the queen is attacked, and I threaten queen f6. So I missed this sequence. Instead, I played e5. He did queenside castling, bishop f3. So the position is still very advantageous for me, and even winning. But less so than if I had played the move, bishop to d3. So he played f4, then I played rook d1, he played rook f8. But rook to d4 to force his queen to move aside and then take the bishop. I shouldn't have taken the bishop right away, remember? He comes to f5, I take the bishop. And here, remember, my opponent resigned, but I'm going to ask you one last question in the video. Let's imagine my opponent plays the pawn move to e5. What should white play in this position? Well, I invite you to pause the video. So what would you have played if my opponent had continued the game and pushed his pawn to e5? Well, you have to keep all the pieces working together and you have to play bishop g4. Counterattacking the queen, the rook protects, the bishop attacks the queen, et dès que le knight bouge, ça se fera maintenant sur échec. And maybe even a check and mate, because you see that the queen also controls all the squares here. For example, If the queen moves, I don't know, maybe it goes to g6, you can deliver mate with knight to b6. I would have liked to finish on that. The bishop attacks, the knight as well. So it's a double check. That's why black can't take either the knight or the bishop, and the queen completely locks the position. That would have been a nice mate to finish with. It's quite rare that in my opening repertoire I have lines like this, very dynamic and tactical, aggressive lines like the ones you just saw. Usually I'm more of a positional player who likes to build up the game and dominate positionally in the long term. So this aggressive line is an exception in my opening repertoire. And I hope you enjoyed it. You can leave me likes, comments, share the video, and support the channel. Goodbye, everyone.